let's start, Tom, with Venezuela. Why don't we talk about I don't know if Trump's described it as beautiful yet, but if he hasn't,
Right.
he's sure to describe it as beautiful very soon. That strike on the marine vessel in the Caribbean waters off the coast of Venezuela that is alleged to have been, and I think we actually have the video, if the control room has the video, I think we do have it. If you haven't seen it yet, yeah, here it is. It's up on the screen. You could just see this vessel getting lit up, but paying attention to it, and if you're listening to this, I'll describe it a bit. Actually, a smaller boat than what a lot of people probably would expect to see from an alleged trafficking vessel, a cartel vessel that's allegedly trafficking drugs. Some experts, Yoan Grillo, I'm thinking of, who's covered cartels for a long time, initially thought that was a bit odd. So, Tom, I just wanted to get your reaction here. Others have said it was perfectly normal that you'd have a small vessel like this, but naval capacities in particular are a fascination of yours and a subject that you have covered for a very long time. So are we going to war, Tom?
I think what you're seeing here is signaling from the administration. So it is unusual, both in terms of to see a strike like this on, a drug smuggling vessel. I think there's pretty high confidence that indeed there were drugs on there, that it did belong to this Venezuelan cartel.
Why do you say that, Tom? Because that's obviously under enormous, it's like the most enormous microscope right now. Is how did they know? They said they had intelligence tracking the movements. Is this part of a designated foreign terrorist organization like Tren de Aragua, or is it like Cartel of the Suns, which they've accused Maduro of being the head of, but also providing material support to Tren de Aragua? So how do we know that?
Yeah, so both cartels, right, have been associated with Maduro and his regime. I think particularly in this case, why we can be relatively confident that it was a part of the Tren de Agua is that the military, and I apologize for my Spanish pronunciation there, for the US military to carry out what they would call kinetic operation or a lethal strike such as this requires a lot of legal safeguards to go through, far more than, for example, there would be the case of the CIA, where there would be could be a more expedited process. I also think when, again, the exigent interest in here is sending a message. They would not want to be in a scenario, the administration, where this turned out to be, as was the case, notably in Afghanistan, where the Biden administration authorized a strike on what turned out to be innocent people in relation to the bombing at Kabul airport that killed 13 Marines. There's a huge amount of a risk that would be attenuated to a mistake, and the gain here, for a relatively very low risk operation where essentially a drone or some kind of aerial platform, it seems, has struck something far away from Americans. To me, all the indicators would suggest, including then that the backdrop, I've talked to a couple of people, and as you mentioned, Yoan, who was one of the, very best people on this. He mentioned one of his sources saying that the center mass in terms of the boat did potentially. So I think we can be confident it was a drug trafficking vessel. I think the most important takeaway from this is the signaling, right? That the video is released, that they decided not to try and intercept it, that they destroyed it, that they are sending a message now to the cartels that we are going to kill you if you come to deliver or attempt to smuggle drugs onto American soil. And that raises a whole range of political ramifications in terms of how do the cartels respond? Do they retaliate, which they manifestly have the means to do? But clearly we see here, I think President Trump putting meat on the bones of what for him, I think, has always been quite an emotive policy issue, which is, stopping the flow of drugs into the United States. So watch this space, I think, would be the top line.
So Pete Hegseth, obviously Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, said today, we have assets in the air, assets in the water, assets on ships, because this is a deadly serious mission for us, and it won't stop with just this strike, to the point you made, Tom, about it being a warning. Anyone else trafficking in those waters, he continued, who we know is a designated narco-terrorist, will face the same fate. So is this do we have more information now on how this happened? Because it's actually a fairly critical question here. We've seen this type of thing play out in the Middle East, but was this a drone? Was this a helicopter? Do we know any? Because that would get to like where potentially we have bases and are launching strikes like this. So what more do we know about that at this juncture?
I mean, I don't know, but for me, the video looks like it's probably a drone based on, that you would have that would be in range going across the Gulf of Mexico. That, you wouldn't necessarily, feasibly you could launch it covertly from Colombia, with the Colombians just denied. I suspect it was launched from the US. Regardless, I think because of the number of naval forces that are really off the Atlantic coast of Venezuela now, we will see direct engagement by manned platforms, whether this was or not. This is just the kind of aperitif, as it were. I mean, that maybe that's a sort of callous choice of words, but we're seeing the beginning here, and this is clearly, a signaling element. One of the things, though, that I think people have to be aware of, or should certainly form part of the debate about this, is, President Trump and the MAGA movement have obviously vested a lot of intellectual capital in the idea of avoiding stupid wars, avoiding entanglements. And there's a cartel which I've been writing about recently. And again, Yoan, who I think you, or Ian, depending on how you do the pronunciation, would be, is a true expert on this.
Yeah.
But this cartel in particular, the Jalisco New Generation cartel, the increasingly powerful cartel kind of almost taking over Mexico. If we stop doing this kind of stuff to them, I think it's very credible that they would start, kidnapping American college students in Cancun, or hitting American cruise ships, or doing stuff on American soil that they have far more logistical capacity to do than, terrorist groups in the Middle East.
That is why this conversation about one particular boat and one strike on one boat is, it's genuinely, I think, a new chapter. I don't know if you read CDR Salamander, Tom, but I wanted to share this story here that CDR Salamander published after what happened yesterday. Said, well, I was wrong Tuesday afternoon. And CDR Salamander, who's, I think, retired Navy, Tom, you may know this more than I do, said, well, I was wrong Tuesday afternoon in reference to a post that he put out after the strike that said, we have been doing this for decades. Well, he goes on, we have been doing a bit of shooting at drug runners, a bit, and then goes on to say, this is new, significantly new. I also don't think this is a one-off. That's similar to the point that you made, Tom, but I wanted to ask you, because we have seen drone strikes, we have seen this type of action in the global war on terror, particularly in spheres in the Middle East, for a very long time. We're familiar with it. We're familiar with the legal justifications that are built up. And what's important about this is the foreign terrorist organization for Tren de Aragua then saying, you sanction Cartel of the Suns because they provide material support to Tren de Aragua, and then you can wrap Maduro into this, and you sort of build a case. Secretary Rubio today cited a grand jury decision in New York, or a court in New York, that had laid out some of the case related to, I think it was Tren de Aragua. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's, is this now coming to our hemisphere? Is it crazy to say that this is coming to our hemisphere?
Well, I mean, look, the drug smuggling on a vast scale has, been going on for a long time. I think what's changed is that President Trump, and this was true in his first term, had a much higher tolerance than both Barack Obama and Joe Biden to do one-off targeted strikes against individuals. Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Quds Force commander, is the best example of that. But there were others that are, still classified, where, would have these limited incidents where the US would essentially kill someone who was determined by the president to be, in this case, President Trump, to be, a threat to the national security of the United States. It goes through, as sort of mentioned before, either that CIA or military legal process. What I think is noticeably different here is the deliberately public nature of this strike, right? Releasing the video of people being killed, narco traffickers on a boat, and a signaling there to the cartels and to their enablers, you should have a moment of pause. There's also, I think, probably an intelligence angle that once you do this, people who are kind of on the fence, or lawyers, accountants, into politicians who are sort of facilitators for these networks that, again, almost definitely operate as transnational, corporations in a sense, taking away the legal factor. That you can say, okay, well, we've got the National Security Agency, which listens to the phone calls, etc., intercepts emails, has an identification on maybe this is a person to approach and say, all right, do you want immunity now? We've heard that you're concerned, or here's a bit of money. You could relocate at some point with your family. We want you to infiltrate. Or in the Plato Plomo, Pablo Escobar way of, the bullet or the silver, do you run the gambit of ending up like those guys on the boat? And so a psychological, this is a kind of a very blatant example of physical warfare manifesting itself into, or as an extension point into psychological warfare. And that's normally, this would be, a rare thing that would happen. And we wouldn't hear about it because it would be very highly classified and the drug traffickers wouldn't want to admit it, obviously. Now it's in the public domain, but to that point before, they also have the capacity to operate against the United States in the public domain. So this is not a simple kind of nice, easy, check a box when we want to kill terrorists thing.
Yeah, Secretary Rubio was in Mexico today and speaking a little bit about what it does feel almost like a tension, Tom, which is on the one hand, these cartels are increasingly more advanced, and that is absolutely accurate. We're seeing, and he talked about, he was in Mexico where they're very concerned. The line of Moreno and Claudia Sheinbaum is basically that a lot of the stuff comes from the United States. A lot of the guns come from the United States, and the Secretary of State actually acknowledged that today, which is unusual for a Republican politician, I would say. You follow this as well, Tom, so tell me if you disagree. But on the other hand, we're also the line is that we're also just going to light them up, and it's going to be totally fine. We're just going to strike these boats, and we're ready for whatever puny, pathetic retaliation they can muster. But these are not your grandfather's cartels, so to speak. Over the last 5 years, in particular, they've exploded. They control. I mean, this has been going on for decades and building, but they control large swaths of territory in countries like Mexico, and the same is true in many different South American countries, Latin American countries. So, Tom, this could easily spiral, and I'm not saying it will, but I'm saying we would be wrong to downplay the odds of actual potential American troops dying in particular missions that could be related to this cause.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, a lot of Americans are not going to stop using the drugs that create massive amounts of revenue for these organizations. And they have, very little incentive at the moment as things stand to back away from that. And that even if you took out, one producer, another potentially fills the space. And so, yes, their capacity, the Trump administration is banking on the US having the ability to out-escalate any counter-escalation that the cartels might apply. But when you reach up the ladder, the only way the United States could master that escalation curve would be to apply the same kind of counterterrorism campaign that we saw really in 2006 to 2009 in Iraq, where you have Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, CIA Special Operations Group doing raids every single night with, then it would be drone strikes as well.
Sinaloa, right,
exactly, across Mexico. Right. That is incredibly aggressive, that is violent, that, as you say, suffers American casualties, that the cartels are then using their leverage and their logistical networks, firearms, explosives inside the United States to potentially do things. And even if the United States can sort of contain the damage or contain the threat to American citizens or civilians, there's also the second order effects of what impact does that have on the Mexican government, right? Where the cartels then start, as happened with Escobar, again, that they would execute anyone who was seen to join the American emboldened campaign against them. And who's willing to step up? Or, does the government potentially fail? So, ultimately, I think the United States could really bring the cartels down to a position of relative weakness as to where they are now. Functionally, I don't think you could really destroy the drug trade because there's a market for it. And the production ability is not hugely complex, and the financial incentives are there. So you could you can bring it down, But the question is, how far do you want to go with this? And I wonder the degree to which the Trump administration is essentially trying to establish, a new quid pro quo with the Mexican government in particular, that they didn't target a Mexican cartel here, it was a Venezuelan one, that they're saying, you guys really, and gals, President Scheinbaum, need to get a grip here, because if you don't, stuff's going to start, blowing up, and maybe we'll release a video, maybe we won't, but do you want that? And do you want to worry about those consequences? And so, again, a lot of posturing. And I would say as well to your viewers, Emily, looking at the naval forces, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, 2,200 Marines off the coast of Venezuela now, there's a lot of military resources that are very finite that have been deployed. I don't think we're about to invade Venezuela, but clearly President Trump has decided to invest significant strategic risk and political capital in taking a hit at this issue.
Did you know that all chips and fries used to be cooked in tallow up until the 1990s, when big corporations switched to cheap processed seed oils? Today, seed oils actually make up 20% of the average American's daily calories, 20%. And recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues and inflammation in the body. But Masa decided to do something about it. They created a tasty and delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils. If you buy a bag of these chips and you look on the back, it's right there. I couldn't believe my eyes the first time I saw it. Truly 3 ingredients: corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. And it's delicious. They taste incredible. Masa is crunchier, tastier, and sturdier than other chips. Leaves you light, satisfied, and energetic with no crash, bloat, or gross, sluggish feeling afterwards. The beef tallow makes the chips much more satiating. Really, it does. So you won't find yourself uncontrollably binging and still feeling hungry afterwards. Personally, I actually can't choose my favorite flavor of the Masa chips. I really like the churro flavor. I really like the lime flavor, but I also just really like the regular flavor. And I do buy these because I really do love them. They're so good. I brought them on a recent trip with my parents. They're delicious. So if you're ready to give Masa a try, go to masachips.com/afterparty and use code afterparty for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/afterparty and code afterparty for 25% off your first order. Great deal. And if you feel like ordering online, that is fine. Starting in October, Masa is actually going to be available nationwide at your local Sprouts supermarket. So stop by and pick up a bag before they're gone.